Hello guys and welcome to this new video. So today we are going to watch the first round of the Sinquefield Cup 2015. As I said, I will do a review of each round of the tournament on after the game, just the next day. What we'll watch today will make as we did with the Russian Chess Championship. We are going to watch just two games. There was a lot of action today, but we'll have no time to watch everything, so I will just make a recap of those two games. So the first one will be Aronian Caruana, and the second one will be Carlsen against Topalov. So let's proceed with the first game. Aronian played d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3. So he avoids the line with bishop b4 if you go knight c3, pinning the knight. So it's theoretical, but we avoid those lines. Black goes d5, knight c3, bishop e7. So we are transposing to a decline Queen's Gambit. Sorry. So bishop f4, castle e3. So it might look a bit like a London system here. What he's going to play is knight bd7 and here pawn to c5, which is the Arvids attack or something like that. I'm not really good with the opponent name and I forget them really quickly. But the move c5 is really a game changer because it's totally changed the pawn structure that you might notice. So here we have kind of a tension in the center between those two pawns. So in the Slav, we love to protect it with the pawn c6. Here, if pawn takes d5, what we want to do is just take, well, maybe not immediately. We could have taken with the knight, but I'm just showing the pawn structure. The idea is that when the pawn on e6 is disappearing, the bishop is just becoming alive. It's born to be alive and might land on g4 on f5. So that's why white doesn't really like to take this pawn. Doesn't want to free this piece. So he could either keep the tension with a move like bishop d3, either play as he did the move c5. So here is like creating some play on the queen side, obviously with this pawn well advanced. So you want to follow up with pushing other pawns here. The thing is that in the black can have two different plans here. Can you find one of them? So the first plan is to break this pawn chain that we see on the queen side. We can play maybe a move like c6 and then push b6, a5 with the plan to destroy this pawn structure that is going to come on b4 and a3. So it's to play on the queen side and destroy the pawn chain, and then if we can destroy that, we are going to have some open files for our pieces, and all the guys are coming out. The bishop on a6 will be doing great. So this is the first plan. I mean, it's not really a plan. It's a plan, but I mean it's very tactical. Like you go c6. And you really have to be quick in order to break up this pawn chain. If you don't achieve that, then probably white is better. If you achieve that, maybe it's equal, maybe you're slightly better. It's a chess game. So it's the first plan, the first idea. The second idea would be to try to move the pawn to e5 and put pressure on this d4 pawn, as well as closing the diagonal for this bishop. Because if the pawns land on d5, this bishop is just buried. So those are the two plans that black can try to achieve. Not that easy to do, but that's the game. So Caruana goes knight e4. So he's trading a knight. So now this knight has a good square to come. Also, you are putting pressure on the c3 knight. Here, Aronian plays rook c1. So he protects the knight because you don't want to see the double pawns, and also he's protecting the c5 pawns in some variation. And here Caruana plays the move knight c3. A more common would be to play c6, knight takes e4. So this was actually in a game. Pawn takes c e4, knight e5, bishop takes e5. So trading a lot of pieces. And here black could go with the move b6, while proceeding with the plan to destroy the pawn chain. So white could continue with b4, a5, a3. Well, this is a chess game. This is complicated, guys. This is just totally another game, just to show what could have happened. So here black goes knight c3, rook takes c3, and pawn to b6 is going to be played. And looks what's the difference when you go immediately pawn to b6. Can you find a move that white could play here? Could you find a move that white could play? Yeah, and white here is going with the pawn to c6. Well, no, it's not taking the pawn. It's going pawn c6, and now this pawn on c7 is can't move. It's far away. This bishop, it's hard to see where it goes for the moment, and when you move your knight away, because you have to move it, and it goes knight f6, it becomes really hard to understand how you will push the pawn to e5. So c6 is really with the idea to stop one of the plan, so the plan e6, e5, and also to kind of block the bishop and maybe put pressure on the pawn at some points, because you have a really amazing pawn on c6 here. The downside of this pawn is that it's far away and it's going to be hard to defend. So here black has a simple threat, bishop b4, pinning the rook, and white anyway would like to play a3, b4. So the move is logical. White goes pawn to a3, protecting the b4 square and launching the pawn from b2 to b4. Black goes pawn to a5, another logical move, stopping the pawn from pushing to b4. White goes bishop d3, and Caruana is going to play knight to e4, which is a move I dislike. Can you find the move? Well, no, let's go knight e4, it's okay. Knight e4, rook c2, because anyway we have to move the rook away. And here Caruana is going pawn to f6. Can you find a move that black could play here? Another move. So he's going to proceed with the plan f6, e5, which, it's playable, but I would have loved to play another thematical move here. Can you find it? So yeah, black could have played the move bishop to a6, bishop takes, rook takes, queen e2 by example, or queen d3, and rook a8. Well, it's maybe not the I don't know if it's better than f6 or not, because all is analyzed by computer and all, but it's a more human approach, and as a coach, that's at least the candidate move I would wait from my pupils, because you want to exchange this bishop on c8. I mean, it's looking to nowhere, and you had a good chance to trade that, a bit like in the French defense. And I mean, trading a bad minor piece against a good minor piece is more than not the good idea. It's just natural chess, and that's what I would have waited. He goes f6, and now Aronian is immediately jumping on the occasion and goes queen e2, developing the queen, and of course having a good look at this a6 square, bishop to d6, and short castle. Here I would like to explain you that bishop takes f4 is not a good move, because the pawn is taking back on f4, and even if the pawns are doubled, this pawn on e6 is really weak, and so with time we are going to kick this knight away and then put pressure on the e6 pawn, and the pawn structure is not going to be weak, because we can always play g3 and protect everybody with our pawns. Though it's not easy to see how the bishop can even come to h3 or g4 in the game, because this pawn on e6 is never moving. So taking the bishop is not an option. The most natural move for black here would be to stick with the plan, queen to e7, by example pawn to h3, because when you play then bishop g4, the square is protected, pawn to e5, bishop h2, and bishop f5. That's a little line I watched with the computer. Well, this pawn on d5 might be a bit weak. I mean, it's always it's just a game. It's complicated. I prefer white, but it's nothing dramatical here for black. So just stick with the plan. Instead, Caruana goes g5. I don't know, guys. A lot of players now are playing those kind of moves. I don't really like them. Just opening too much the king. So take, trading the pieces. Now rook e1. So what's the plan here with white? What would you think is the plan here with white? Well, the plan with white is pretty simple. Now that the pawn has been pushed to g5, this king is naked. And what you want to do is to trade some pawns in the center, opening up the position, and then Caruana will have to pay for this move g5. So rook e1 is preparing pawn to e4. Black goes a4. So he's stopping the b4, b5 idea to come protect the pawns. Because now when you push b4, the pawn is intercepted en passant. Knight to d2, proceeding to the plan. Just preparing e4. Just a logical move. Pawn to e5. Pawn to e4. So now you can see the king just lightened in red, as everybody is going to be exchanged in the center, and it will be very dangerous for the king. And Caruana plays an amazing move. I don't know, at this point I don't know if it's good or bad. Just the conception, the chess conception of this game is so strange for me. He goes pawn to f5 here, and this pawn to f5 is well, it looks scary at first because you see 4 pawns in front of you, just coming step by step. It's like soldiers, or just marching on you. But what you watch after a few seconds is this king again. I mean, you never forget it's here, and you have to find a way to make him pay. So here, Aronian is playing the move f3. The idea is that after pawn takes d5, pawn takes e5, sorry. If black would play pawn e4, pawn d6, pawn d3. So here, if we take on c7, he's going queen f6, threatening the checkmate and the rook, so we cannot retake the pawn. So we cannot take on f7, on c7, because of queen f6. But we can go queen takes d3, queen takes d6. Sorry. And this is an advantage for white. So this is okay. I mean, the pawn is way too far, and this pawn on d5 also weak. This is really good for white. But the thing is that after pawn e5, black can answer with knight takes c4, pawn to f3, and knight c5. And even if I prefer white here, we have to say that black is going to bring a blocker on e6, and it might not be that easy to open up the position after black stopped the pawn from being pushed with this beautiful blocker on e6. So Aronian is starting with the move f3, threatening to take now on e5, and the thing is that if you take on d4, didn't analyze the move, but I mean the pawn to e5 is just looking majestuous, as it's hard now to find a good move with the knight. You have to go to e8 probably, and pawn to e6, and you cannot bring your blocker anymore, and the queen is coming inside, and all the pawns might fall quickly. So the thing is that white is not touching anything, and he's just putting pressure on the black position now. It's pawn to f3. Black goes pawn takes c4. Should have gone rook e8. It was a better move, but after queen f2 it was really hard to play still. The computer gives something like it's almost equal, but as for a human being it looks like it's already +1, +150 for white. So pawn takes the e4 is going to trade the pawns, and this is this is something you should not do. You should not release the pressure. There is a big tension in the center, and you should never be the first one to take. This is a common grandmaster advice. Never be the first one to make the exchanges in the center when you have pawn tension like that. And he takes first on e4, pawn takes e4, and rook a5. Again, if you take on d4, it's just met by pawn to e5 and rook a5. So you see the pieces not connected with each other. This rook is coming from the 5th rank. And so now white is going to play something beautiful somehow. So pawn takes, knight takes. So the knight is coming back to the center. Bishop c4 check. King g8. And here he goes with a really good move. He goes pawn to d5. And the thing with pawn to d5 is that this rook is cut now from the pawn and is just pointless on a5. So rook on a5 is cut from its only role, which was to go to protect the e5 pawn through the 5th rank. So this piece is out of the game. The king on g7 is looking worse and worse, as it's more clear now how white pieces could land on the king side. So this king looks bad. The pawn on g5, of course, it's just I mean, I don't even have a word to say what it is, but I mean, it's just totally misplaced, weak. It doesn't have the role to defend the king. So misplaced, and the bishop on c8 has still not moved after 24 moves. So after d5, forcing rook e8 to protect the pawn, white has a perfect position here to launch an attack. Can you find how Levon Aronian did continue the game? I'll give you 15 seconds. So you can pause the video. So Levon Aronian is going knight to e4. And what is good is that the beautiful lines and the interesting lines are just in the game. So knight to e4, letting black going knight d4. But with this knight on e4, looking at those key squares now, the queen enters to h5, sacking the rook on c2, so black takes the rook. It's not forced totally, but if you don't do that with black, it's just like resigning. And white goes knight take g5. And what is amazing here is that white is threatening queen h7, king f6, and knight e4 checkmate, as we will see. So if you take the rook on e1, simply white take here, king f8, queen f7, checkmate, king f6, knight to e4, and it's a checkmate. The king has no more squares to live. So you cannot take the rook. You cannot take the rook, and white is threatening queen h7. So the only move to protect it that makes sense is bishop to f5, developing the bishop and coming to protect some squares. Here, white goes simply rook f1. Well, bringing another piece to the attack, threatening the bishop. Here, black is going to play queen f6, but can you find what's the winning idea after bishop g6? 10 seconds for this one. Can pause the video as usual. Okay, and here white has a totally crazy line. Rook f7 check, forcing bishop takes f7. And now, if you go with the logical queen f7, the king is just leaving to h6. And it's hard to attacking on the dark squares. We don't have any more pieces. We just have 3 pieces to finish the attack, and it's not enough. We are not going to checkmate the guy. So we don't take the bishop. We first go to take the pawn. So if king f8, queen f7, checkmate, forcing king f6. Knight to e4 check. forcing king e7. And now pawn to d6, attacking the bishop. So if pawn takes d6, queen f7, checkmate. So he has to take with the queen. Queen takes f7, king d8, and knight takes d6 with the checkmate coming on d7. So that's how white proceed with the checkmate. So rook f1, queen f6. White goes knight e6 check. The best move was to play rook f5, but I mean, everything is winning. Queen f5, knight e6, rook takes c6, and queen takes f5, just winning a piece. So it was a way to win it, but it goes knight e6 check instead. Rook takes c6, rook takes f5, queen g6. Here you can go rook g5, winning a piece, winning the queen, but it goes pawn e6. In fact, the endgame is pretty easy to win. So you just go rook takes h5, and here you cannot stop the pawn. I mean, you are going to be a pawn down with black, and this pawn is just unstoppable. So knight d4, pawn to e7, threatening to queen the pawn. You can't even come to f7 because of the bishop. So rook a8 is forced. Rook takes e5. Rook e8, stopping the pawn. Now rook e4. If you go knight c6, you might feel that you attack the pawn 2 times and that you just came back in the game. But after bishop b5, rook takes e7, attacking the rook, white can simply take the knight and protects the rook back. So knight takes c6 is not working. It's going knight f5 to attack the pawn, bishop to e6. Now if you go knight to e7, it's met by bishop d7, king f7, trying to play an endgame with an exchange down, but rook f4 is coming and you have to leave the rook and you are losing a full rook. So you cannot take the pawn. So he goes knight to d6, trying to stop desperately the pawn. Bishop d7, knight takes e4, bishop takes e8, king f6, attacking the pawn and you cannot protect it. And now can you find the final blow? You have 5 seconds. You can pause the video as usual. And white goes bishop to g6, threatening to queen the pawn and threatening the knight. And I mean, if black takes the pawn, you take the knight. And if you take the bishop, he's queening the pawn, and this is game over. So this was the first game, already 23 minutes in the video. We will watch the second game of the day I choose for you, which is Carlsen, the world chess champion and #1 in the Elo rating, against the former world champion Veselin Topalov, which is also the #2, sharing the second place on the Elo rating system with Vishianan. So it's #1 against #2 in the world. The #1, Magnus Carlsen, is white. Pawn to e4, pawn to c5, knight f3, d6, bishop b5, and knight d7. So you have to understand that if you play a move like bishop d7 against Magnus Carlsen, if you play such a line, this is going to be positional chess, just inputting moves. And here Carlsen is the best player in the world. Is just unplayable, and you don't want, as Veselin Topalov, to go in those lines where Magnus is really in his comfort zone, and he's just always playing amazing chess, and you don't want to let him play his little clay quarter. I would call him a clay quarter chess. I mean, playing for hours, position where you have to place the pieces a bit better, and to find harmony is really the best in the world with that, and he's pretty much unplayable. So you better go knight d7, search for more sharp lines. Castle, knight f6. So this is logical. Rook e1, pawn to a6, asking the question to the bishop. Here Carlsen goes bishop d3. This is modern chess, guys. Usually you would say if you retreat the bishop, you go to f1. This is more looks more normal, and then maybe go g3, bishop g2 in midterm future. But he goes bishop d3. The thing just will input a move b5, c4. So b5 is logical, you want to expand. And pawn to c4, finding counterplay. Attacking the pawn on b4. And if you go, by example, a move like b4, the idea is that this bishop is not really blocking the c1 bishop, because you want to go pawn to b3, bishop to b2, then maybe knight c2, pawn to d4, by example. And your two bishops are well placed on those two diagonals. So that's the idea, is that this pawn is not really blocked for the moment, and this bishop is pretty useful on this diagonal. Though it's really modern, and I don't think you should try some moves in game. It's really something you prepare at home and you play on the board. More often you want to just put your pieces in harmony together, and it's more often than not the good move. But those guys are so good in calculation, they analyze so much chess that they can play some moves we won't be able to explain with the more classical approach of chess. And here Veselin Topalov continues with this approach. He goes pawn to g5. So he's threatening g4. You can't really allow that. You don't want to take the pawn and meet g4, then the knight comes to e5. This looks ugly. This knight doesn't really have squares. All doesn't really look harmonious. So you cannot allow that, and he goes to take the pawn on g5. So white is a pawn up, but Veselin Topalov with this novelty, g5 is a novelty. Pawn to g5 is a novelty. With this move, Topalov achieved exactly what he wanted. It's to have a very sharp position when Carlsen has to defend his king, because that's where Carlsen is weaker. That's where you want to bring him, because that's where he's making mistakes. And this is mind game. You want your opponent to be on your field. So now knight e5, bishop e2. If you go queen e2 to protect the bishop and the pawn, it would be met by pawn h6, knight f3, and bishop g4. And black really has a tremendous attack on the king side. Now next you are going to rip the bishop off, make double pawns, rook g8 check, and this looks really ugly. So you have to give back the pawn. And black takes the pawn on c4, and we arrive to the big position of this game now. So here white has a lot of possibilities. The first one that comes to mind is pawn to d4, pawn takes d3, bishop takes d3, and rook g8. That's probably the line I would have chosen personally. So giving back we gave back the pawn, of course, so we are not a pawn up, but this king doesn't really look good. And we could think of moves like f4, and trying to put pressure on the center and attack this weird king. So trying to bring the pieces on natural square now, knight c3, maybe bishop e3. Just try to play natural moves from here, always having a knight on f7, maybe some queen b3 can arrive at some point. It's a complicated position, but that's the first line that comes to mind. The second line that might come to mind is knight to f3. Knight to f3. Because you know that anyway, black is going to play rook g8. So if knight takes f3, bishop f3, threatening e5 with the rook behind and rook b8. This is a position I really like for white, because this bishop is just looking so good defending the king. And now the pawn structure for black is wrong, and this king has no address. So black is not going to take your knight. He goes knight d3, bishop d3, pawn d3, pawn to e5. So opening up the center, and knight takes e5. And again, this king on e8 is really on the wrong place. Cannot go either way, probably. All the pieces on the 8th rank, almost. And the knight on e5 is just looking at so many killing squares. Like, you even can go bishop g7 just because of knight c6. So it's not easy to see how black can develop here. And I mean, I really love it for white. I really love this position. It's really looking good. So that's the two good options you could have. So one is somehow relocating the knight to e5. The other one is opening up the center. Easier to find d4 than knight f3. Knight f3 is pretty hard move to find. But here, Carlsen plays knight a3, and you will understand the mistake pretty soon. Rook to g8. And now the thing is that if you take the pawn, black is just taking your knight, you take the knight, and the knight is disappearing on g5. So you are losing a piece if you take this pawn. Though if now you go d4, pawn d3, bishop d3, this move knight is a3 just doesn't make sense. I mean, the knight belongs to c3, doesn't it? I mean, we learned it in the first 6 months of our chess classes for most of us. And now you have this knight on a3, it doesn't make sense because it was there just to eat the pawn. So you don't want to play that. But if you play a move like f4 now, trying to move the knight away, it goes knight d3. And you have no time to take on c4 because it takes your rook. And when you go rook f1, protecting your pawn and attacking this one, it goes pawn to d5. And you probably want to take it, but then he will take with the queen, and he's opening up everything on your king. So this ain't be good for you. So you don't want to play that also, because it's not on a3 again. Is misplaced. So here Carlsen probably understood that he did a mistake because he thought a lot. I was watching the game live, and I cannot say the exact number, but he thought for a good 20 minutes, and he decided to go knight c4. So the first move that we said is impossible to play. So knight takes c4, and here instead of taking the knight, he goes pawn to d4. So he just sacked a piece for some kind of initiative, very doubtful initiative, I would say. It's not the first time I see Carlsen making those kind of weird sacrifice. I could remember a game in the Olympiads where he done something a bit like that. I just can't remember the opponent. But it's not the first time he does that. So knight to b6. I mean, we are just a piece up. Now the computer gives the best move: pawn c5, queen d8, king d8, knight f7, king e8. This is pretty much first line, and knight g5. Playing this endgame with a piece down for 2 pawns, but I mean the pawn structure for black is not ideal, and it's certainly better for black, but it's certainly a 2-result game, but it's really hard to convert. So the computer is pragmatic, and it goes with the line that is hard to convert. But I mean, you cannot go with white after 13 moves with a piece down in an endgame trying to draw that. So you don't want to exchange the queens, and it goes bishop h5. So it's threatening the pawn on f7. Knight takes h5, queen takes h5, and rook g7. Here the other option was rook g6. And I just show that because there is a pretty line. Queen h7, rook g7, queen h8, pawn to d4, so winning the pawn now. Knight h7, so you think like, hey, I just done that. I just get the bishop. But here blacks gives back an exchange, don't forget. We've been so up in material. And now the black pawn structure is just extremely good as we go to control the center. And it's a good advantage for black. It's really hard to attack the king in the center here. You bring the pawn to e5, the bishop to e6. You can even play the bishop to e7, f6, and the king to e7. Just an example. And your king is just safe because you have so many strong pawns around. but it's not the line he decided. He goes rook g7, so he has to protect the pawns, so he has only these two options. Rook g7, white goes knight takes h7, and here Topalov will go with the human queen d7. I've been hearing in another video or reading on ChaseBase that or another website that this move is dubious. I mean, it's a human move. I mean, the idea is pretty logical is to go then queen g4 and trade the queens. Though, of course, when you watch with the computer, everything changes a lot. And the move knight d7 to protect the bishop was better, trying to develop the pieces quickly and bring the king maybe on the safer squares on c8. But I mean, I won't call queen d7 a bad move, and I don't want to go too much in computer lines, especially here. So queen d7, pawn takes, and here, okay, let's go with that. So here white played e5, but could have played knight f8. How black? So black could defend here. I just saw that. I don't know why. My chess base opened the arrow. So black could have go here queen h3. Because if you take back if you take back the knight, can you find how white is winning in checkmate in 3 moves here? Can you find that? Can you find the checkmate in 3 moves? Stop the video, or I'm going with it. So queen h8 check, rook g8, bishop h6 check, king e8, and queen takes g8 checkmate. So you cannot retake the pawn, but you play queen h3, threading checkmate and the queen, forcing the exchange, bishop h3, pawn to g3, and here black might feel that he did the hard job trapping, exchanging the queens, but the thing is that it's not easy to take back the knight, because if you take it, white goes bishop h6 and pins your rook. And if you really want to take it, you have to move your rook away. So you go rook g8, by example. He goes knight h7, so he's threatening to leave, and you have to go f6. And the thing is that now white is going to seize another pawn, and he's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against 1, 2, 3. And with 3 pawns for the piece, it's a different story, as white still has some initiative and you need to lose at least 1 or 2 moves to get the knight. And so white here somehow has an advantage, a good one even. I don't think you can win the game, but I think that you can apply some pressure, especially if you are Carlsen. And, well, should be a draw, but maybe you can do that. So Carlsen didn't go with that. He probably didn't play that. Well, first of all, he thought really long time in the opening, and also the clock was not looking too good. So you don't have half an hour to dive and calculate all the lines. And also, it's against the nature to exchange the queens. Like, you've been trying to do everything to keep queens on the board. And here is the time you should change the gear and trade the queens. It's not that easy to do. So white goes pawn to e5, another logical move, threatening pawn to e6. But here black plays a pretty move. He goes queen c6. It's even better than trading the queens with queen g4, because you attack the pawn here 2 times and you're finding some counter play on the long diagonal. So pawn to f3, now queen to g6, forcing the thread, knight f6, because if you just thread rook g6 and well, I mean, just such a big advantage. I mean, I don't really know what I want to say. I want to say that this knight is weird. Yeah, it will be better placed in the center. So knight f6, king d8, and now you are forced to thread the queens anyway. rook g6, and knight e4. So the thing is that instead of having the knight on h7 going to g5, you have it on f6 going to e4. But I mean, here the evaluation is pretty simple. White is a piece down for 2 pawns. It's just not enough. The pieces are going to talk. So let's proceed to the game. Bishop b7, a logical move. So now if you take on c5, you just lose the f3 pawn. So protecting the c5 pawn. White goes h4. Logical, you want to push your pawns, especially the passed pawns. So logical, rook c8, defending the pawn. h5, rook to g8. So you don't want to go to g7 because you don't want to allow h6 with a tempo. Bishop d2 developing. Here black is going to play a pretty knight move, knight c4. So bringing the knight on a good square. Bishop c3. So he has to protect the pawn, but now it's not hard to kick the knight away. You will see that it's not that easy to proceed with b3. And also when you play b3, you will allow c4. So bishop to h6, developing the pieces. Give a check. King e8, so you cannot go to c7 because of this pawn. And rook d3. So the idea of rook d3 is to stop black for going knight e3. So if you go b3 here, knight e3 is just a killer because you attack the rook, the pawn, and the knight. And after rook d2, by example, there is maybe some tactics, but I will just show that now we are just a piece up and those 2 pawns are looking pretty stupid in the center. This is already time to resign for white. But the thing is that I forgot to say, but black was in a big Zeitnot. So I mean the game basically is it's almost possible to resign here for white. Maybe not resigning, but I mean you're really close to being absolutely lost. But the thing is that Veselin Topalov is in a big Zeitnot here, and anything can happen really. Topalov is known to be a blunderer. He really can blunder something at some point, just a piece in a move. It happens to him from time to time. And being in a big Zeitnot, I believe that Magnus was trying to keep things complicated, hoping for some blackout from Topalov. So rook d3. Protecting the pawn and protecting the e3 square. Black goes bishop f4. Now putting pressure on the e5 pawn. This is just perfectly played by black. He's just really putting pressure everywhere with his pieces. Knight f2, protecting the pawn. Now black goes bishop to c6. So now maybe he wants to go bishop b5. Also in some variation he's covering the d7 square maybe. It's just a better square for the bishop. Knight to h3. So now you could go b3. I would have gone b3, forcing black to go knight h3, and probably now it's c4 coming, trading pawns to open the file for the rook, and also it's an isolated pawn, so you love to exchange that. Or you could go maybe later on if you don't want to push the pawn, knight b5, and you could either land on d4. With some tactics, or maybe go back to c7, e6, g5, or g7, and going to attack on the king side. So he went knight h3, threatening the bishop, bishop g3, threatening the rook and keeping an eye on the pawn, rook e2. So now the 2 rooks are on the same diagonal. So we play bishop b5, having a look at the rooks. Rook d1 pretty much forced. Here the move knight takes c5 is doing the job just fine. So it's a forced threads. And at the end we have bishop e2, threatening the rook and the pawn. So after rook e1, bishop f3. We backed 2 pawns and now we are an exchange up and the pawn up. We are going to be an exchange and the pawn up in this endgame. So this was winning. But as I said, Topalov had just a few seconds on the clock. And after rook d1, he goes back bishop c6. His idea is that the best move here is rook d3 to come back, protecting the pawn. And then you can repeat the move with bishop b5, rook d1. and maybe then you change, because anyway white is not doing just anything in this position, and you really can afford some easy moves to save time. I mean, to go to the 40 moves and get some extra time. So it's a typical strategy. So here white goes knight f2, so it doesn't want to go rook d3. But now black is playing bishop takes e5. And after bishop takes e5, so it's not the move that was played, you think that you won a piece, but it's just met by bishop f3. The bishop disappeared, and now we are winning back a rook. So we are winning back a material here. So bishop e5, just want to show you that here bishop takes f3. Pawn takes f3 is not working because we don't have a good square to make the discover check. So knight f2, bishop e5 winning, so winning back the pawn. Knight to g4. Now we are threatening the bishop. And okay, Carlsen just played now, because of the time trouble, king f8, going away and going closer to the pawn. But I mean, here it's just a piece for a pawn for black. So knight e5, knight takes, rook takes. So now even less pieces on the board. Bishop e8, threatening, protecting the pawn. Pawn to g4, so he's freeing the rook. f6, rook e6, again attacking. Bishop b5 now. So now everything is protected. White is going with another attack on the pawn e7, but black simply goes rook c7. White is a piece down. It's just the move number 40 here that was played, and this is just game over. Carlsen resigned on move 40. So as in the Stavanger tournament in the first round, when Carlsen lost to Topalov, he loses again against Topalov in the first round here in St. Louis for the Sinquefield Cup. Let's see if he can rebound and strike back on the next round. Just want to say last thing about this game is that last time in Stavanger, Carlsen lost because he didn't know after the 60s move. 60s move, he didn't have extra time. He didn't really know the role of the tournament in Stavanger. Here he was winning, I mean, Stavanger, and just lost because of that. A game that has to be won, and then had a bad tournament. Can be understandable after such deceiving loss. I mean, just not knowing the rule. Just a shame. Just being ashamed of yourself maybe a bit. Here in St. Louis, he's losing on the board because of a really good preparation by Topalov in the game. Going, not good preparation by the fact it's a novelty that gives you an advantage, but by the fact it's a novelty that brings you to a position when Carlsen is not on his turf. So a good textbook by Topalov of how to prepare for a chess game and get the full point out of that. So let's go to have a look at the results to wrap up the video. So the results of the day, every game were won, so it was hard to decide which game to show you today. So I decided to go with Carlsen, that was on on the first board. Carlsen lost to Topalov. On the second board, Nakamura showed some great endgame skills and great preparation to beat Vichy Anand. Aronian and Caruana, we saw this game. Gary Grichuk was also a good game, but it was not the most exciting. It was a good game, but not the most exciting. And on the fifth board, Wesley So went to take a pawn. I mean, he lost like 4 or 5 tempo in order just to win a pawn, to be a pawn up. And then he kind of suffered against Vachilagrav, which made him pay those 5 tempo for only a pawn, and won the game. So our fellow Frenchman is 1 out of 1. And so that's all for today. maybe I will make some videos in future with one of the game of this round, because it was really exciting, but it will not be a part of the coverage. So I will be back tomorrow after the rounds with a new coverage of the round 2. This one was pretty long, 15 minutes, but the games were really exciting and interesting. So I really took my time to explain you all the insights. Thank you for watching the video. Have a nice day. See you for round 2. Bye.